3, 2, 1.
Very hard to do in Los Angeles right now as an art major, as an artist.
So I'm here in Dianella talking to Tanya Lee about her practice, and my first question, Tanya, is tell me something about your background as an artist and where it began and where you're at the moment.
Studying at art school was always something I wanted to do, so I didn't really think about that decision too much. I just went and thought I'd figure it out afterwards. And I didn't really, I wasn't particularly into performance or saw performance as a medium that I would do. But I sort of was really interested in sculpture always, and objects, and sort of while I was at art school I got really interested in how objects are used. So how do they affect the way your body interacts with them, and how do objects sort of affect a relationship between two people. And so I started to make things, and the main point of them was to be used for something and for that to change something, and then sort of documenting how these sculptural objects were used until I sort of the object became less and less important and it was more about what happened. And so that sort of led me into performance, and sort of these documentations then became more of the work than the thing I'd made.
Did you go into art school with the intention of being a sculptor?
I did. Yeah, I totally thought I didn't think sort of negotiating with people all the time would be a way of making art. I thought I could sort of close doors and go into a space and just, I don't know, be in there and paint or something, like this really romantic idea of what making art would be. So I didn't think that sort of putting work out into that public space and having to negotiate things with people all the time would be part of doing what I do.
What was the major catalyst for the shift in your approach away from objects?
Oh, good question. So I think I was doing a sculpture class, and we had to look at utensils, I think, and I made a really weird spoon that was going to be really difficult to use as a spoon. And then I videoed someone using it, and I was really interested in their movements and the way it was sort of almost reversed evolution in a way, like things that made things harder rather than easier is sort of the reverse of technology, and it then changes how you respond to the world. And I was sort of like, oh, that's really interesting, like I want to keep looking at that.
You were telling me the other day also that you had clothing made out of fencing.
Yeah.
Tell me a bit about that.
So that's a work that I did for Fremantle Arts Centre in 2013. And before that I'd sort of been making a lot of video around where I lived, and the videos and a lot of the work was sort of situated in the everyday. So sort of looking at suburban environments and things like that, I got really interested in front fences. And because they're sort of this interesting aesthetic compromise of they're still defined territory, and they're still quite psychologically important, but they're aestheticized to match the house or to sort of present a certain look to a space. So in that way they're sort of really interesting borders to look at, and the more I looked at them, the more interested I became in why people make certain choices and why heights are certain heights, and different suburbs have different sort of fence bylaws. So I think in Fremantle they're gaps in fences that are called conversation holes, so that you can have interactions with people in the street, and there's like a sort of a bridge between public and private space. And they're really different to back fences. Back fences are sort of purely just for one thing, which is to define private space, and so there's no sort of aesthetic interest in them. They're usually, above head height and sort of colour bond or something like that. So
the fence, in a way, I suppose, is a physical expression of the relationships between neighbours.
Yeah, and also your relationship between what you think might be outside your private space. So what you think you might have to keep out or keep in. And a lot of that's sort of imagined, or it might not necessarily be real, but I think that defines how people feel about their home and their privacy and things like that. So I sort of made costumes which were one-person fences. So the work's called Personal Space. So it's sort of about, there's enough room in there for you to have space around you. And they basically match exactly a set of houses that I chose. They're almost camouflaged against the existing front fence, and they sort of reflect back to the people that live in those spaces their own aesthetic choices and maybe what they mean if you start to pick them apart and things like that. Yeah.
Did moving to Perth, because you're not originally from Perth, you are from WA, but did moving to Perth, do you think, have an impact on your thoughts around space and domestic space and your interactions with neighbours?
Yeah, possibly, just because it's so much more defined. Being from the wheat belt, I think borders and territory, maybe it's a bit, there's sort of more grey area, or boundaries aren't demarcated from other boundaries so well. Between properties and things like that, just looks like the same fence that's in the middle of the property and things like that. So possibly, yeah.
I think I find it interesting because I've just recently moved to Perth. That just the layout of gardens and streets is very different. It's very characteristic of Perth. Very different from Melbourne, Sydney, other places that I've been to in Australia.
Yeah.
The whole verge thing to me is completely foreign.
Yeah, and we have reticulation here.
That's right.
Which they don't have in other states necessarily.
Yeah.
And we're such a water deprived city that then the maintenance of your space is sort of how much care you put in it and how much you water it and things like that. Can sort of, I guess, articulate other things. Yeah. I read a really good article about Canberra, how Canberra doesn't have fences, and that was sort of a planning decision made by Burley Griffin, or when the city was first getting planned, that it would sort of be this utopia with no fences. But people have got around that by doing different things, such as grow hedges and things like that. So, I haven't been to sort of check that out, but it's pretty interesting.
Do you think the way that we think about fences has changed over the last few decades?
Yeah, definitely. I think suburban architecture has changed. I think borders are getting slowly more aggressive, more defined. I think that's sort of a trend in maybe even just in bigger areas than just Perth, or I think it's sort of, houses are designed now where you drive straight into the garage, and the garage there's a door from the garage to the inside of your house, and you actually don't have to be in the front of your house or interact with the street at all. That's contemporary suburban design, so I think that's definitely a trend that's on the increase. I don't know whether that's good or bad. It's just interesting.
The reason why I think that is, I always think that there was a photograph that I have of my dad talking to a neighbour in our back garden back in the 1970s in the UK, and the fence was kind of chest height, and they were both having a beer over the fence.
Yeah, perfect bar height.
Yeah. And you would never see that now. It's usually
Yeah.
a 1.8 metre, kind
Yeah.
of on fence usually.
Yeah, and then a lot of people have sort of like things added to their fence.
Yeah.
So they've got the trellis over the fence, and then or like a bit of shade cloth over that, and yeah, it's sort of this more and more insular, maybe.
Yeah. What do you, with your work, dealing with, I suppose, suburbia as well? Tell me a little bit about how that as a theme started to develop as well in your work.
So, I guess with that sort of interest in objects and things, it really comes from everyday objects and everyday scenarios that we're really used to, and we repeat so often that you stop thinking about why you do them or what they mean or how they define who you are and how they define your identity, and not only your personal identity but sort of national identity and all those sorts of things. So then sort of expanding that every day. I mean, yeah, I live in the suburbs. This is my everyday. And that started to be really interesting to then look at what are these things that we do all the time and we repeat and repeat and repeat, but maybe don't question as much. And I think everybody really recognises the aesthetic of their own suburb and their own home, and yeah, even though like I definitely notice like little differences in architecture between like here compared to like Tasmania or Sydney, or like it's instantly recognisable, I think, as being your city, and yeah, so then that's sort of appealing in that fact that you can be like, oh, that's like a really everyday thing for me that's been changed in this way. So then it gets you to question what are those things that you're doing.
What do you think the impact might have been of in the middle of your study actually then taking a year out and living in a different country?
Yeah.
How did that affect your work?
Yeah. So that sort of happened before I started making a lot of these works, and I think I mean I went to a European country where it's arguably culturally not even that alien, but I definitely experienced some culture shock and experienced like a big language barrier. And the absurdity of that is overwhelming, I think, sometimes. Like trying to go to a supermarket or trying to find a certain product at a shop, like the sort of mountain that you might have to climb to do that is really interesting, and it sort of makes you look at all those social codes differently, and even not sort of being in on a lot of the context, or missing a lot of the social codes, or not having access to a whole bunch of information before you open your mouth and ask a question, sort of then made me aware of how little things can have such big changes to the way we understand just everything around us and its meaning. And so I think that's something I experienced.